This is panel A, from the light bulb idea to a viable company, and where do you start? So I want to welcome everyone to this panel. I'm going to have the panelists introduce themselves, starting with Cliff.
Hello, everybody. My name is Cliff Holkamp. I'm the senior lecturer in entrepreneurship and the director of entrepreneurship at the Olin Business School at Washington University. Also co-founder and general partner of Cultivation Capital. So I'm involved both on the education side of startups as well as on the funding side. It's my pleasure to be here today and serve as the moderator. And we've got a fantastic panel here. 3 out of the 4 of these people are brilliant. And we're going to let you figure out which 3 I'm talking about.
Whoa!
So maybe we'll start it out and let everybody introduce themselves. If you wouldn't mind, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and the organization that you represent. Jerry, should we start with you?
Okay. I'm Jerry Katz. I hold the chair in entrepreneurship at St. Louis U. I run their entrepreneurship programs. I also am the founder of the Billiken Angel Network. Been here, unfortunately, I'm still, after 30 years, not quite a St. Louisan. I'm on sabbatical right now, and I'm planning to go to high school and graduate in the next couple of weeks. I'm open to suggestions on where to go.
Excellent. Christy Maxfield. I am the Director of Entrepreneur Development Services at the Center for Emerging Technologies. I've had the good fortune to be part of a startup, and on a daily basis, I work with IT, bioscience, and consumer manufactured product entrepreneurs who are early stage in their idea development.
I'm Raman Lalazari. I'm a student at Washington University completing an MD and an MBA, and I'm here representing Sling Health. I'm the president and CEO. We're an incubator program based off of WashU's campus for student teams to complete a year-long program developing solutions to clinical problems from local hospitals.
Raman, you're only doing an MBA and an MD? That's it?
Trying to
that is really unimpressive.
I'm the idiot, right?
I'm Emre Toker. I have a cold and I'm heavily medicated, so that's who Clint is referring to. I'm the director of the Scandler Center for Entrepreneurship at Washington University. I'm a former medical device entrepreneur. I am a yet unsuccessful but still active angel investor waiting for that miraculous unicorn exit to take place, hopefully. So I'm glad to be here. This is my 3rd year in St. Louis. Before that, I was in Tucson, Arizona for about 30 years.
Okay, so we're going to be handing out surveys to provide feedback. We really would appreciate you to fill that out about the panel and give us feedback on it. We're also going to be doing a free membership raffle today to the Missouri Venture Forum, which it's a 1-year membership for you to join the organization and be a part of it. So we will be passing that out as well. So this panel will help newcomers find where to go to refine their ideation process, what organizations in town are providing support, and what are the most important steps when you first have that light bulb and you go, oh crap, I think I want to start a company. So Cliff, it's all you.
Thank you. So take into context that the thought is that these entrepreneurs are at idea stage, right? So people are just starting out. What do you think, first question, what do you think is most important for them to learn, or what do they need to know? They had to prioritize when they're sort of going out, they know they need to learn some things. What would you suggest that they go and try to figure out first amongst the many things they need to learn? Emery?
Yeah, so what I see most often is trying to answer the question of can this be done as opposed to should this be done. So if I were you as an entrepreneur with a bright new idea, I wouldn't so much focus on can I do this, but should I do this question. And the way to do this, in my opinion, is to identify what are the current top 3 risks today at this point in time to this future that I envision becoming reality, and then try to find ways in which you can reduce the risk, de-risk each of these risk items. Some of these will be by going and talking to people who are experts in that particular area to de-risk that area, potential team members who can do so. The web has all the information that you need. It's just a matter of curating, find the right type of information that will guide you in that manner. So I would have at the top of my mind the word de-risking.
Will you give an example of a type of risk that might be on that list?
Sure. So for example, we had a group of students from Washington University who started a company, raised a substantial amount of money, over $1 million, received FDA clearance, and they thought that was great. They received FDA clearance. But when they came to our group and asked for an investment, it was very obvious to us we passed on it because there was not enough recurring revenue generation potential with the company. So we could have told them that before they spent $1 million trying to get the FDA clearance, because that was an answerable question before you took the big risk with the money to make sure that you could build the product. That to me is a recent example that's been on the top of my mind, because in a way we failed our students by not giving them that advice when they needed it most. Of course, we're going to claim that they didn't listen to us, but it was a combination of both, probably.
Raman, what do you think are the most important things someone needs to study up on before launching a business?
I think what we emphasize to the students that run through our program when they start, and this is even probably pre-Lightbulb, is when you're trying to figure out what to work on, we emphasize focusing on a problem that you see, a pain in the industry that you're trying to target, before you've even begun to conceptualize what a solution might look like. Because the decisions that you make that ultimately affect the success or failure of the venture are all ultimately going to depend on how they address or don't address the pain that you've identified to begin with. And I think that that's just the most fundamental piece of the puzzle when you're trying to launch a venture is what are you solving? So knowing the problem, identifying it, knowing who it affects and all the stakeholders involved, because in the area that we focus on in healthcare, there can be numerous stakeholders, some that often get overlooked, how it affects each of those stakeholders and what the motivations are, and how ultimately you can translate success and benefit from whatever that solution might look like in terms and quantities that stakeholder can understand. So really identifying the pain and the problem that the venture is going to solve.
Christy, would you like to disagree with that?
No, I'd like to double down on that. Be wedded to the problem, not the solution. So along those lines, not all the entrepreneurs in our community are going to come from academic institutions. So if you're not already immersed in a community that can help you ask those questions, you really need to start looking at what organizations are out there. There are a variety of different maps of the ecosystem. And we very much as a community try to make sure that there's no wrong door. So it doesn't really matter if we're the perfect place for you, but you do need to start to engage folks and ask questions. And then be comfortable knowing that this may be your idea, but there are a lot of people who have a lot of experience that they can add to that equation. So we always encourage people to talk about their idea early and often so that they can get some of that early feedback and answer that, should I be doing this? Am I addressing the right issue? And get into more formalized relationships where you can really vet that idea. I often tell entrepreneurs that we work with that I can promise you'll leave one of CET's programs still as an entrepreneur. I can't promise you're going to leave with your venture. So if we can teach you the skills you need to validate those ideas, then you can take them and go use those same skills to evaluate all sorts of ideas, even if this one isn't the one you should be pursuing.
So that's such an interesting concept about be wedded to the problem and not your solution. At the same time, entrepreneurs are told that they should have tenacity and never give up, right? So how do you coach, when you're coaching somebody, or if, let's take it from the entrepreneur's point of view, if they're being told by an advisor, a mentor, a person they've met that this is a bad idea, how do they know whether they should push back and show that tenacity of sticking to their guns, or should they take that, adjust, and take a different route? Like, can you give us a little insight of how that entrepreneur should know, because we've all heard stories of famous entrepreneurs who were told it would never happen, it's impossible, and they had this grit and tenacity and stayed with it and showed everybody wrong.
Yes.
So how do we know when you should stick to your guns and prove everyone you're wrong, and when you should adjust, adapt, evolve?
As an entrepreneur, I would often ask myself, am I a fool to keep going or a fool to stop?
Okay.
And I think first you have to be willing to ask that question. And then you also need to realize, well, what parts are within my control and which parts, and might I be able to fix, right? Where's the flaw? And what parts might be beyond, if we can't create a greater reoccurring revenue source, then that's a fundamental problem. And it may be that we have to wait for another period of time for regulations to change or economic climate to change. But in this instance, in today's world, it's not going to work. So I try to be both cheerleader, knowing that sometimes I will be crusher of hopes and dreams. So in that balance, I often try to use I believe it's American Idol type of reference, where the lovely person who is tone deaf has decided that even though every judge has told them that they really are not suited to be a singer, they've decided that their tenacity will take them through and they will prove them wrong. Sometimes you have to recognize that you have tone deafness and that fatal flaw cannot be overcome. And other times you have to recognize that the opportunity is such that you really do need to wait for other factors to come into play, but there's not a fatal flaw to address. So it's an imperfect science, but generally speaking, if you're getting the same feedback from many members of your particular ecosystem, in this case, the St. Louis ecosystem, we're not colluding against you. There's probably something to it. So opening up your ears to that constructive criticism and being willing to take it in, understand that it's not a criticism of you, although it may feel very, very personal, and that there are other opportunities to apply the skills that you have. So it's delicate.
Yeah. So Jerry, are there any other items we missed that are important? Idea stage?
Let me go back to the being said no to. There is, since we're in St. Louis, and St. Louis people are really nice.
Really.
I've discovered that opens up an interesting possibility, and I'll share it with you. So you found someone you think, you found a free radical solo investor out there, and you made your pitch, and they said no. There are all sorts of variations of no. By the way, this only applies in pitching for money. This has absolutely no application in dating. Okay, just in case
Good
anyone's
disclaimer.
still at that stage of life. I teach a lot of undergrads, so I have to qualify that. But the thing is that if they've heard your pitch, they've asked a couple questions and they've said no, what I teach my students is to say, is there someone you think I should talk to? And you know, the nice thing about being in St. Louis rather than New York or LA or San Francisco is that the people here will actually stop and think about it. And they may think that, yeah, you know, there is someone who has an interest in this area, who might be at the stage of life they'd like to do an investment, or they might click with you as a person. And in St. Louis, they probably will say, yeah, I do know someone, which I then ask my students to then say, could you make the connection? And again, St. Louisans being really nice people, most of them will do that. So that you went from a total no, you know, and you're saying my life's over, to having the person you talk to contact, emails, text, call someone they know and say, hey, I was just listening to this kid. They've got some interesting ideas. Not for me, but I thought you might be interested. Would you have coffee with them? And that's how you keep moving down the line. Along the same lines, let's face it, St. Louis is really strong for certain things. One of my students, now my center director, started Stadia Ventures, a sports accelerator. And they're going like gangbusters because sports, St. Louis, duh. So, and I'm really glad for them. But there are things that St. Louis is not into, and it might be where your idea is located. So before you totally give up, it does make sense to go to someplace. Go to Chicago. go to San Francisco, go to Boston, go to Miami, and try that same effort to pitch down there and see if you're hearing the same sorts of issues, then I think it's pretty clear you are really wrong. By the way, when the hardcore research types actually start looking at the population of entrepreneurs, the number of entrepreneurs who've gotten all the way through and pitched to angels and been said no to, the number of those rejectees who go off and become multimillionaires is less than 1%. The number who go bankrupt is more like 20%. And fortunately, the other 80% just give up and go do something else. So there is some value to, when you get that many no's, accepting it.
Emery?
So there may be a difference between hearing a no from an investor and hearing a no from a mentor. In my opinion, a good mentor never says no because we don't know enough. A good mentor will only ask questions, and that's what I try to do myself. Just keep asking questions, asking questions, asking questions. I don't know if it's going to fly. I would have never thought Airbnb would have succeeded. You know, who's going to sleep in your flea-ridden mattress other than a few hippies? And now it's bigger than many of the hotel chains combined. So asking questions is a good way. And then secondly, this tolerance to hearing no, even if you hear no. So a good founder actually is a little bit schizophrenic. You have to have this maniacal dedication, religious commitment to the vision, but super pragmatic about, super flexible about the solution. So what I say is to the students again, don't fall in love with the solution, fall in love with the problem. Because if there really is a problem, eventually you're going to come up with some solution that at some point will make sense. It may not be the right time now, too late, too early, blah, blah. But that repetition of focusing on the problem is a way to protect yourself against discouragement.
So what would you all say to someone who maybe doesn't have business training or business skills, yet they want to be an entrepreneur? They might come from a different kind of professional background. How important is it for them to know certain business skills, and which ones should they pursue and how should they do it? I'm thinking about accounting, about marketing, finance. Can you be an entrepreneur without understanding some of these topics, or is this a prerequisite? Jerry, I'll start with you.
Most entrepreneurs, the really famous, successful ones, if you've noticed, have gaping holes in their knowledge. Remember, Bill Gates couldn't pick out his own clothes and couldn't hold a civil conversation until he got married and had daily coaching. And we don't get started on Steve Jobs because without Wozniak to handle the hardware and Makela to handle the numbers, Apple would have cratered in week 2. So the thing is that you can find, beg, borrow, barter for the missing expertise. And there are all sorts of people around town who will tell you the pieces of the puzzle that you're not thinking about and help you sort of formulate what do you need to know. So I think that, I really think that coming in without knowing everything in advance is fine. Almost no entrepreneur knows everything when they're coming in. There is a group of folks that do. They're called MBAs. And they don't always start the best businesses. So, if because of your experience, your expertise in whatever area, it may not be a technology. You may just know a market really well and know what their pains are. That's fine. If you've got that as a core, because that's really what we're all saying. If you've got that problem, you've got that market, that need, that's the core, go with that, and you can add everything else in.
Raman, would you like to make a counterpoint on that slide against MBAs?
The slight's well taken is probably accurate. But I will push back on, I don't think you can come in totally blank to numbers just because, so first things first, entrepreneurship is a very interdisciplinary profession. It brings together, depending on the industry that you're targeting, various disciplines that are going to have to talk to each other and figure out how each other work. But one of the really fundamental languages, I think, that when you're making pitches are through just quantitative things that come out of the various subfields of business, things like financial modeling and market sizing and that kind of thing. I don't think you need to be particularly well-versed and an expert in any of those things, but to have some basic understanding of what financial statements look like, how to communicate a financial projection and the size of a market to a potential investor. I think just having a working knowledge of what that might be, even if you might not be the person creating the model or making that part of the pitch, I think it's valuable to know because that's the language that the people that you're talking to are going to be speaking, and it's kind of like going to a foreign country without knowing some of the basic, how are you, where's the bathroom, right? Now, that being said, I think it's really, really crucial for an entrepreneur, and especially a very early stage entrepreneur, to know when and how to ask for help and get help from individuals who have expertise that you might not, and that often ends up being in the disciplines of business. And one of the less technical aspects of what I think I would consider business is management and leadership. And I think one of the sometimes neglected points at which a venture could fail is neglecting to seek help with management and leadership, and for the person who came up with the idea and who has perhaps like the scientific or technical expertise, not wanting to cede the leadership of the company to somebody who has those kinds of skills. And I think that's just something to think about as you begin a venture, to know where the gaps are, and those might be in leadership and management and other aspects of business that you might need to seek help for later on. But yeah, again, it's very interdisciplinary. There are going to be multiple people from multiple backgrounds involved in getting something off the ground successfully. So knowing where the gaps are is crucial.
I'm going to push back. I push back at the beginning part. Most of you actually have the basic understanding to handle financials. But the language that we use in everyday life is different than the language used in the financial world. How many people here keep a running total in their checkbook or on their debit card? Quick show of hands. Okay, those people raising their hands, when they find out, that's called cash flow. If you can keep track of your debit card, that's cash flow, if you understand that. If you do your taxes, you've done your balance sheet, but you've used one column instead of two. The fact is that it's a very particular language. You need to understand the language to have credibility when you're presenting. But the fundamental knowledge are things that you've done. If you've ever done a budget in your life, you have done financial projecting. How much will it cost? How much do I need? And when do I need it? That's exactly it. So most of this stuff, even though the language is scary and different, are things that you have done.
Christy?
I think, got to get it off my chest. I think the most important discipline in my mind that you need to get a handle on, actually, in my opinion, is human psychology. When I had my own startups, I used to tell my wife 95% of what I do is psychology and 5% is everything else. So all this technical training and so on is accounting for 5% of what I do, because you have to have human psychology with your employees, human psychology with your customers, human psychology with your investors, your vendors. If you don't get a handle on human psychology, it will be incredibly difficult for you to win as an entrepreneur, in my opinion.
No doubt. Christy, what are some of the local resources in St. Louis that people can reference to get some of these skills?
Sure.
Whether it's the business skills, management, leadership, maybe even psychology. Where would someone go?
Well, we have a wealth of resources, and I think learning the language is an incredible part of it. Jargon can close doors if we're not careful. Not everybody is going to even self-identify as an entrepreneur. So looking for things that might even be outside of your own personal comfort zone. So if you don't like the E word, look for business owner or even, frankly, those folks who are working on a side hustle, right? We're communicating our ability to work with you at whatever level you're at in different language, hoping that we can also break down some of those barriers. So the Center for Emerging Technology, we do our Square One program, a business model validation program in the spring and a boot camp in the fall. But year-round, there's any number of colleagues who are doing things, whether it's the small business technology and development centers or the universities. We have resources on our website so that entrepreneurs can tap into things 24/7. And there's just whenever it's right for you, there's somebody doing something that will at least get you on the first step. So we have events like this, but we also, which happen to be called Roadmap. BioSTL has a roadmap. BALSA also has a roadmap, BALSA Foundation. So there's folks out there who have tried to lay out that pathway for you so that you can start to apply your transferable skills and know that, oh, what I do over here is called this over here, and when I put it together, I'm actually a lot more prepared than I thought I would be. So I would say that simply by starting to inquire as to what's out there, you can find some more formal programs, and then just getting plugged in and starting to speak that language, finding your tribe. There's things like Venture Cafe and 1 Million Cups. So on any day of the week, you can probably be going somewhere where you're in the environment, breathing the same air as people who are excited about starting businesses, learning more about business, finding co-founders, finding team members, asking questions, pitching ideas. So there's quite a lot.
To do the Square One program, do you have to be a resident of CET? Who's open? How would you get involved with that?
Sure. So no, almost none of my participants are residents of CET, and I joke that when you get a door, you think you know everything. So anyone who's actually renting a place with a door that locks has decided they don't need my services, but with a few exceptions. So median age of the participants in our program is 40. We've been fortunate to attract about half men, half women. And been very purposeful in reaching out to women and underrepresented minorities, particularly in the bioscience, IT, and consumer manufactured products spaces. That being said, consumer manufactured products is the tent that has the greatest flexibility. So when in doubt, give me a call, shoot us an email. My colleague Ricky and Henry and I are more than happy to meet with you and talk about your idea. And then if we're not the right place for you, then we'll talk about where you might be able to get the resources that you need.
How important do you think a background in the same industry is? Emery, if somebody wants to do something in the medical field, but they don't have a medical background, is that even feasible? Just how much can you prepare yourself to go in a totally different industry, especially if it's technical? I know there's probably software developers here who don't have technical backgrounds,
Sure.
life sciences or healthcare that aren't scientists or doctors. Is there mobility there into those industries?
Absolutely. The trick is to find team members that will fill in your gaps. If you don't know medical devices, the risk factor is I don't know medical devices, therefore I need to find myself a partner who believes in the vision just as strongly as I do, who happens to know medical devices. So, this is a team effort, and the objective is to bring together a group of people who complement one another. So I had a medical device company, but I didn't know enough about software, and there was a lot of software involved. I didn't know enough about mechanical engineering. That was a lot of mechanics involved. There was electronics involved. There was no way I could have kept up with everything to the level of our people, our team members, but that's where the human psychology comes in. And then B, you have to be a glutton for learning, such that I would tell my people, you may be an expert, but there is no way you're going to be able to snow me, so don't even try. If you're a computer scientist, I just know enough that I'll be able to gauge whether you're coming up with the right type of estimates and so on and so forth. So again, I'm a big proponent of this psychology thing.
Raman, have you ever had anyone in Sling Health that didn't have a medical or a research background that found any success going into that field?
Yeah, we we absolutely do. So again, I want to reiterate that I think an entrepreneurial venture is always an interdisciplinary process, and there are going to be multiple backgrounds and fields that are going to come into an interplay to get something off the ground, and you're not going to know every single piece of it. And Emery kind of hit on that. You have a medical device company, but you might not have the expertise in software. Medicine might not be the prime piece of the puzzle there. But yeah, so we've had, I'd highlight ePharmix, who had a CEO who was an undergraduate student at WashU with no formal medical training, who launched a medical software company. He brought on a medical student for help on that aspect. So one thing I will say though, with going into an industry that you're not coming from, is to just know know your stuff when you go into any pitch to the stakeholders, and you get that by talking to them when you discover and verbalize and begin to delineate the pain and the problem. Make sure you're talking to the stakeholders, because you'll pick up insights and ways to make yourself validated when you present a potential solution down the road. And this type of thing might not even come up during the pitch. There might be a conversation that happens afterwards or informally or on the side. If you can bring up aspects of the field or of the industry to kind of give yourself some validation that you've done your homework, I think that goes a really, really long way. But in terms of formal training, you're not going to have formal training in every single aspect of the company to get it off the ground. And certainly none of the Sling Health project leaders that we have are well versed in all of medicine and business and software and mechanical engineering. They have their expertises. We have interdisciplinary teams where people are bringing their various backgrounds to the table.
You both made really important points about knowing enough. So educating yourself in the areas where you're weakened is really important, so that you know if you're bringing on team members that are actually able to deliver, right? And so completely, you're not in a position where you can completely abdicate and be like, well, that's the finance guy's thing, or that's the marketing person's thing. You need to know enough about your own business and your own situation, not only to be able to know if these folks are doing the right thing by you, but also because it's your job as the founder to convey the entire vision and be able to answer all the questions about the business model and the revenue model and the marketing plan and how your financials all fit together. So yet, no, you don't need to know everything, but you need to know a lot.
And I guess you can learn that with time from your partners, right? You don't necessarily, you're not going to start out knowing everything day one. So that's...
And you're not going to pitch day one either.
Right.
You know, we've talked a lot about being in front of folks and hearing a no on a pitch. You might hear no long before you get to a pitch, or a lot of questions, as Emery said, with mentors and other subject matter experts who are asking the questions that we're not saying you can't be successful, but you better be able to answer these questions as you move forward. You can't think that you're going to get to the pitch and be like, and then a miracle happens, and then we have a $100 million company. You know, you will have had to have figured that out along the way, and the job of the ecosystem, the job of mentors and educators, is to ask those questions so that you're learning all along the way, and building up that network and building up that intellectual capital.
And just to add to that, anticipate those questions, and that comes from talking to your stakeholders and talking to your team members. And ideally, if you have team members that are bringing that expertise, you can start to anticipate questions and formulate what you need to know and how much you need to know going in.
Yeah.
All right, Jerry, I got a tough question for you. So you're the founder of Billiken Angels, and it seems like that in fundraising there's this catch-22 that frustrates entrepreneurs, and that is that they go to try to get money, and investors tell them, well, we're not comfortable investing until we see more traction or more progress. But how in the world do they get more traction, more progress if they don't raise any money? And they're in this catch-22, right? So what can an entrepreneur do to try to struggle their way through this quandary?
The lean startup, and that's an eminently Googleable term, so throw that in, has basically taught us that you can generate a lot of metrics that demonstrate customer interest.
Such as metrics?
I was going to explain it. There are actually all sorts of cool companies now that will let you create a landing page, which is basically, hi, this is a great idea for this product or something like that. Here's what it'll do. If you're interested in finding out more as it gets ready to ship, give us your email. And literally, you know how many people saw that, how many people clicked, how many read, how many put in their emails. And as you see those sorts of things, that's an indicator of interest. And yeah, and that kind of interest is a predictor of sales. Say what? Okay. So the best thing to do, the best predictor of sales is sales. So if you start selling your product or service early, and you can show that you have a consistent idea of who your customer is, and they're giving you referrals, they're giving you high marks, even if you're not making enormous inroads, because it's just you and you're maybe only doing this part-time, but you're able, if you can tell us your hit rate. we can sell one time out of every 4. We talk to 4 companies, we will sell 1. That begins to make sense. How many companies are we talking about? You're now at 50 companies. Okay, and you've sold about 10 or 12 of your units. So those sorts of things, when you come in with that, that's what's called traction. And whether it's actual sales or basically pre-sales commitments or things like that, that gives us more confidence. Going back to what, if you picked up anything that the rest of the crew has been talking about, it's the idea that there's a problem that people will pay to have solved. And so if you've got the solution and you've got evidence that people will pay for that, that makes us feel eminently better about the whole thing.
Great, thank you. Let's go ahead and open it up for some questions from the audience. If you all have any questions about early stage. Yes?
Way in the back.
Anybody else? Yep.
Thank you so much for a lot of good information. So my question is, if somebody has an idea, they have a day-to-day life, they have a profession, they just have a great idea, how do you move past having that idea for so long and sleeping on that to actually sharing it with somebody? Is there like a helpline 1-800 that you call? Communication that you get started. So once you get rolling, you know consistency will create results. But it's that first step of who do they call, who do they talk to?
So on Thursdays from 3 to 8 is a venture cafe at 4240 Duncan. You could go there and make your goal for that evening to be to talk to 3 people about your idea.
Can you
could do that
explain
this-
what Venture Cafe is?
Sure. So Venture Cafe is a weekly gathering at 4240 Duncan. There are anywhere from 400 to 500 people there on a weekly basis over that time frame from 3 to 8 p.m. There's scheduled programming, so you can get on the mailing list and decide which program you'd like to go to. All of them are related to innovation in the broadest sense about how do we improve the human condition and how do we use our ingenuity to do that. But there's also the collegial aspect of it, being in close proximity to people who have self-identified as being interested in innovation and entrepreneurship. And so people always say, like, how do you approach venture capital? You're telling me there's hundreds of people every week and I don't know how to do. I say decide what you're going to get out of it that week. If that week what you're trying to do is be at that seminar where you want to hear the speaker that day, then that's a successful venture cafe. For you, if part of it is like you just don't know how to get off the dime, set a deadline for yourself. I'm going, and a goal. I'm going to go and I'm going to talk to 3 people. I'm going to explain the idea I've been thinking about and see what kind of reaction I get, right? And then after that, from in terms of like actually getting it out of your mouth and going, you know, any one of us, you can take any one of our cards and link in with any one of us on social media and say, you know, here's an outline, an overview of like what my idea is. You know, where would I even start, right? So is it a lifestyle business? Is it a bioscience business? Are you looking more at fintech or, you know, or agriculture? Because where you want to be, what space you want to be in dictates who we say, hey, you should probably talk to. I personally spend my days talking to early stage entrepreneurs about their ideas and trying to see, you know, when I say my median age is 40, that means almost everyone in the classes that we teach is working full time. Almost everyone in those classes has something they've been thinking about, you know, really just wrestling with for years in some cases.
Can I add one thing in?
Yeah, please.
One other thing you can do when it's late at night and you're thinking about your idea and you're thinking, who can I turn to? Turn to SCORE. SCORE.stl.org. It's actually used to be the Service Corps Retired Executives, but it's made up a lot more people than retired executives now. They do counseling by email, and they're affiliated with the federal government and the SBA. They will respond to anyone. They have literally thousands of members all over the country, so they have expertise in almost everything you can imagine. And you can find either local people to give you advice and feedback, and you can actually follow up with meetings with them, or you can find, you know, someone with 30 years experience who actually now lives in the middle of Montana and will give you feedback. So, you know, you can do that. You can go to things like the Small Business Development and Technology Centers, which provide free counseling, Veterans Business Center, The SBA has an office here in St. Louis. All of them provide free counseling. Glad to do it. So, and all of those, SCORE and SBDCs, all of those handle all businesses of any sort, and they also have really extensive referral networks with all of us. So it's those are places to start.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much for so much input. I have a biotech company, and then our technology is connected to improve chemotherapy. So first day when I started, started talking to the people here, everybody expressed that it's a kind of a long shot development program. They were not interested in coming out of local investors. So we relied on federal grants, and then fortunately we were successful for the last 3 years. So one of the good things I found out was that peer reviewers, when they did even good and bad aspects of the technology, were able to improve. But my basic problem is that with all these things, when I bring back to the St. Louis community, I still have a problem of convincing the people here to invest. Is there anything that I have missed here, or can you guide us what kind of pitching I should change?
Emery?
So this may be actually an important point for everybody here. So 73% of venture capital-backed startups end up failing. 73%. So put yourself in the shoes of the investor. And let me ask a very quick rhetorical question here. If you were issuing a new credit card and you knew that the population had a 73% default rate, what interest rate would you have to charge just to break even? So investors are not into collecting interest, but at some point when your company is acquired, we have to have enough upside to make the risk worthwhile to us. So if you have a therapeutic or a chemotherapy agent where you're 15 years away to the first patient, you will have a hard time convincing people that there is enough upside for them to take the risk. So if you have watched Shark Tank, what they'll say then is, I'll give you $100,000, but I'll take half your company, because that's the only way the upside is going to compensate me for the risk that I take.
Jerry, are there other options besides venture capital? It seems like everybody wants to pitch the professional investors. What are stats around companies and different ways they get funded and other options?
VCs and organized angel groups fund roughly the same amount of businesses, about $4 to $5 billion a year each. Private angels who are not part of angel groups, like in St. Louis, the angel groups are the Archangels, the Billiken Angels, iSelect, and Cultivation Capital. iSelect and Cultivation are funds. Archangels and Billiken Angels are networks where the rich people hold onto their money until they see a business, and then they invest individually. So the deal is this. The for angels who are not part of a group, they actually invest about 5 times as much. So the thing you pray for is to stumble across a motivated angel, typically someone who has a background in the industry that you are planning to go into. Probably has been an entrepreneur, has cashed out, retired, or something like that, which means they have money. And they are looking to stay in the business, sort of keep a toe in. If they like you, if they like the idea, they may be willing to tolerate a longer payout or be satisfied with a lower payout because they would like to see you as the next generation of entrepreneurs in their industry. So that is, where do you find these people? You find them at places like Venture Cafe. You find them at demo days when people are doing they're doing pitching, because that's where these free or radical, free-floating angels show up hoping to find something interesting. Go to the trade association, professional association for your industry, because those retirees or the old guard there are the kind of people that would be your motivated angels. And sit down with your closest family and friends and think about who are the rich people you know. And that's the traditional source.
Friends, family, and fools.
Friends,
Yep.
family, and fools.
One more question. Yep.
So the angels here
Yeah.
It does. Actually, I got a stat.
Yeah.
80% of angel investments are made within 20 miles of the investor's house.
Yeah.
So there might be a perception that these groups are investing out of town, but they're really not. 80% is invested within 20 miles. So your best source of capital is going to be local capital. And part of it is because of the risk and the desire to have a personal relationship with the entrepreneur, the desire to have better oversight, higher degree of trust. You can imagine all the reasons that might be.
And most folks won't get angel capital. Most folks won't get venture capital.
In the first place.
In the first place. And so while we talk about it in the programming we do, we talk about it because everybody wants to know how to get it. And it is important language and information for you to know, but most folks won't.
So what's the number one way to fund your business?
It's to go sell
Sell things?
something.
Call
And
that
that's the number
bootstrapping.
one way. The number two way is friends, family, and fools. And if you're in a certain industry, in bio, for example, there are government programs, and folks kind of poo-poo them, but they're non-dilutive, which means they don't take a piece of your company, right? And they're incremental, which means that if you're really onto something, you may get up to $3 million over a 3-year period, which is more than you're going to get out of most other investors, particularly if they're not taking a piece of your company. So while that feels like it's not quite what I was looking for, I challenge everybody to take a second look at those opportunities, because those opportunities are there for a reason. And while they're very competitive and they're hard to get, so is venture capital. And it comes with a lot more strings. So just really educating yourself on who's investing in this, and that's not always people, it's sometimes institutions. And then knowing, how can I get to the point where I can sell something? Because once I start to sell something, chances are I'm going to get to a point where investors come to me and want to make an investment in my company, and I don't need their money. So then it's a choice about whether or not I want to take their money and what terms I'd like to offer. And that's a whole different conversation.
Does anybody else have any closing thoughts before we wrap up? All right. Well, thank you very much to our panel. Really appreciate it.